Hello. Right, we better get started because we don't want to finish late. I think that clock is slow, just by a few minutes, so I make it 3 p.m. So, hello again, welcome back. So, what we do on Fridays are the seminar slots, but today I'm going to give essentially another lecture. This is the introductory lecture that you most probably have been expecting yesterday. The take-home message from today, and maybe the entire module really, is that the global challenges that we're going to be talking about are really a challenge of systems. Some of you have come across climate change. I mean, who doesn't study climate change at school or college? And you might be studying climate change as part of your BA or BSc in geography or something. You've talked about food security, the green revolution. You would have come across a lot of these issues before, but we do something distinct, we do something different, and I'm pretty sure you would have never done it before because we think about those different issues in the context of something called systems dynamics. So it's just a way of looking at the set of interacting, quite complex problems. So we're talking about the global challenges, and you can think about them all as maybe a single system with different facets or elements. And the whole point of the module, I think, is to give you some tools, experience, the abilities to be able to critique and understand these kind of complex systems. So today, to that end, we've got some objectives. What's it about? Well, hopefully you've got a reasonably good idea what the module's about from my first lecture. What are we going to be doing? How are we going to progress the module? How's it taught? And then, of course, the thing that I'm sure lots of you are interested in, the assessments. How do you actually get a mark for this? Before I do that, I need to tell you how you can get in contact with me. So, you can drop me an email. If you're really bored, you can follow me on Twitter. You can come see me immediately after class, so I hang around. I try and finish on time, so there will be opportunities for you to come and have a chat if there's any immediate things you want to talk to me about or ask. And if you want to come and see me, I'm in this building. This lecture's awesome. My office is just down the corridor there. I've got an office hour specifically for this module. I can't remember what it is. I put the details on the Blackboard course, which leads me nicely into the Blackboard course. So we use Blackboard quite a lot. Pretty much all the important information, all the teaching materials, the lecture materials are on Blackboard. I put slides up before lectures, and there will be also video recordings of lectures as well. I'll talk about that a bit more. So if you've got any issues or questions or anything you want to find out about the module, then have a look at the Blackboard course first, please. There is, I know some of you come across the module through this thing, the Global Challenges website. This is static. I don't update this anymore during the teaching term. It's all done on Blackboard. Previously, it was becoming a bit confusing. Is it going to be on the website? Is it going to be on Blackboard? The website now is just a very static thing. You can think of it as a kind of an electronic online module handbook. So it's mainly for recruiting and promotion of the module, rather than how we actually do the teaching. That all now happens on Blackboard. So, after the first lecture, and I know people do say about this module, global challenges, yeah, that's the one we're all doomed, the one we're all going to die, something awful is happening, something terrible is going to happen. And look, I'm going to be honest with you, I'll be honest with you with the scale of the challenges and the things that we need to fathom out. And so the only reading I'm giving you this week is the simple little article, it'll take you 5 minutes to read. It's reporting on some of the latest science as to why do we think there is a problem? Why should we be concerned? What are we worried about? And that's really talking about the planetary boundaries framework. We don't exclusively think about the global challenges in terms of the planetary boundaries, but this is a very, very good place to start because it summarises an awful lot of the important information. So on Blackboard, for example, if you go there, you'll find a PDF of that article. If you can, there's also a link. If you click through, you'll see the article online, and there are lots and lots of links in the article itself. So that's also a good portion to start your general background reading. So, the global challenges, right. So we cover a lot of ground in this course. So the first topic we talk about is going to be population, but then we follow that each week with a different kind of global challenge. Now, Each one of those global challenges you can consider in and of themselves. They could almost be entire programs of study. In fact, some people do. They do a degree in demography, and then a master's in demography, a PhD in demography. Their entire research career is based on demography and demographic theory. We've got a week in which to cover the basics, but not just that, to understand, well, how does the change in human populations affect food security? How does food security impact energy security? Or how does energy security impact food security? How we can continue to gain access to sufficient amounts of fresh water? What does habitat destruction mean in terms of biodiversity loss, and why should we care about it? And in the middle there, I put notions of governance. And so we talk about that as well. Given that there are all these intermingling, interacting challenges, whose job is it to somehow fix this? How are we going to come up with viable solutions to these kind of problems? Now, if we're not careful, what we end up doing is producing a very, very complicated, unfathomably difficult to understand morass of stuff. It's all kicking off, doesn't matter what we do, we can't fix anything. So in order to focus attentions, I consider planetary boundaries ideas, maybe limits ideas, in the context of something that's come to be called the perfect storm, the perfect environmental storm. So this has been popularised by the previous UK Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir John Beddington, who in 2009 wrote what's come to be a very influential white paper. Since he's given interviews on it, he's done lecture tours, it's been much reported in the press, and it's got policy traction, i.e. people who make laws think this is important and now want to do things differently. And what Beddington argued is that, yes, climate change, biodiversity loss, there might be problems 50 years or 100 or 1,000 years, but really it's what's going to happen up to about 2040, before the middle of this century, that we need to be thinking of urgently right now, because by the middle of this century, certainly by 2040, there's going to be 9 billion people alive on planet Earth. And when you think about not just the increasing numbers of people, but the increasing numbers of middle-class people, people in the emerging economies of China or India or maybe Brazil and other nations, an extra 1 billion people who want intensity of consumption approximating our current rates of intensity of consumption, it's really, really hard to see how you're going to do that, because by 2040, the global Earth system is going to have to grow 50% more food, generate 50% more energy, and gain access to 50% more fresh water than it does currently. And it's going to have to do that at the same time as reducing its impacts on the climate through reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing its land use change, so reducing biodiversity loss, reducing ocean acidification. We've somehow got to work the Earth system much harder at the same time as reducing our impacts on it. And I think it's fair to say that nobody has got any idea at all how we're going to do that. So climate change is just one element of the problem. If we want to stay within 1.5 degrees of warming, global emissions of greenhouse gases are 0 in 5 years' time. Now, I don't think that's very realistic. So what are the consequences of us not doing that? How are we going to get from where we are right now to not 1,000 years, but as little as 30 years, certainly within your lifetimes? What kind of solutions do we need to put in place? So this certainly isn't a storm in a teacup. Arguably, or sometimes I try to make a case, it's one of the greatest set of interacting challenges that humans have ever faced. And unfortunately, you're the guys who are going to have to solve it. So, one way we might be able to do that is coming up with this notion that the global challenges, yes, they're all problems. Would you mind shutting the door? Sorry. I left it open because it was really hot in there, but it's just propped up with a chair. That's awesome. Thank you. It was really hot when I got here. There's nothing worse than a Friday afternoon and it's warm and the person's boring. I mean, you're going to fall asleep. Right. So global challenge, it's a challenge of systems. So we don't just look at one thing. We try and understand how do they interact. Now, that might not be something that you are typically well disposed to do. Who thinks they're an expert? Who's a specialist? Okay, who's in there? Let's say, who's a finalist? Who's in their last year of study? Anyone? Anyone want to? Okay. They're all the tired, stressed ones. You might not think you're a specialist or an expert, but you most probably know much, much more about your particular subject than the vast majority of the UK population, certainly the vast majority of the global population. Because what we've done, most probably, if you come at least from the UK education system, by the time, in fact, before you're 16, when you're thinking about the GCSEs, the kind of examinations you want to do at school, you're already being kind of steered towards, well, you're very sciencey. or you're more humanities, you might be more music, or you might be more economics. You're already being guided. You can specialise further when you start to do your A-levels, and then when you get to university, if you're not careful, you do some particular programs of study. All you study is that one subject. So engineering, for example. Engineering, they make the case that you have to do their core subjects and nothing else because you've got to get accreditation. And so that means, for the last 3 years of your life, you just studied one thing. I don't think that's a very good idea, right? It produces these kind of quite insular pillars of expertise. And also, more generally, what's the value of increasing specialisation when you're not going to use it? So if I was to ask you, for those who are not in your first year of study, what did you study, semester 2 last year, or semester 1 last year? Many of my tutees, they can't even tell me, let alone tell me the important things they learnt. We predispose you to be able to take on a large amount of information, cram it in, reproduce it in an essay or an exam, and then probably throw it away and never think about that for the rest of your life. Now, there are important skills in being able to synthesise and understand information, but really, institutionally, and certainly, a level of a civilization, if we want to make inroads into the solutions of global challenges, then we need to work across disciplines, because one discipline in and of itself is not going to be the answer. What that means in this module is that we do a lot of group work, because we want different perspectives, we want different backgrounds. Now, I know that this is some people's immediate response to group work. You don't like it, it's either boring, everybody just mucks around, nobody actually does sufficient amounts of work, or perhaps even worse, you have to talk to people you don't know, right? You have to interact with strangers. Now, if I'm going to make you do group work, then I need to be able to facilitate the environment in which you do that. So that's what Fridays are for, so that's what the seminars are for. So this is our seminar room in which we do our group work. Now, as you will see, it's not particularly well disposed to doing group work. It's got fixed seating, it's a shit seminar room, right? But you work with what you've got, and every year I have this problem because it's just impossible to timetable this module given that you're all on different years of study and programs of study, but we can fix it. And I do a lot of work in the seminars in order to facilitate those kind of group activities. So you might have been burnt or bummed out by group activities before, but try and leave those preconceptions or maybe baggage, and I will do my best to try and facilitate useful activities. So interdisciplinary is important, group work, collaborative work is important, and I want to disclose also why I think that's important, why I think interdisciplinary research is important, because I come from quite an interdisciplinary background, right? So many years ago, it's hard to believe, but I'm getting on now, I went to university and I studied philosophy. So if you'd asked me what does a philosopher look like, I would have said something like this, an old guy with a beard. I purposely am not growing a beard. I don't want to be one of those, when you're younger, I think you can get away with it, the kind of hipster beard, bald head thing. But as you get older, I feel you're just compensating for your lack of hair. Anyway, so I studied philosophy and I really enjoyed it. But it was some years later that I wanted to get more engaged with academia. So I did a master's in a kind of a computer science department. So this might be what you think a computer scientist looks like. And then I carried on and I ended up doing a PhD in computational neuroscience and robotics, and then worked for a biogeochemistry institute. And this might be what you might think a kind of a scientist, somebody who studies biogeochemistry. And now, after all that, I work in the geography department, where I colour in maps all day. All the geographers laugh at that joke, because that's what they're consistently told geography is. And I do like maps, I do like spatial processes. What I do now, however, is try and understand the Earth as this thing called a social ecological system. Humans are affecting this Earth system, and the Earth system affects the humans. It was always the case, ever since there's been humans, ever since there's been life on Earth. And my interest in this specifically came from my work in the Biogeochemistry Institute, where I was employed on an astrobiology project. So is there life elsewhere in the universe? And if there is, how would we detect it? So we worked on understanding co-evolutionary planetary systems, and even how that might actually affect geological processes. So that was cool, and I really liked it. But I realised that my interest in, let's say, environmental or sustainability issues could actually be continued through in a research context, because if you understand how life might affect planetary systems, that might help us how to understand a particular kind of life, Homo sapiens, is affecting a particular planet Earth, and what that may mean now and some point into the future. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I relentlessly go on about the value of interdisciplinary research in education. I'm something like a pain in the arse about it, but I do think it's really quite useful. So, what are we going to do in more practical terms? Here are the 12 weeks. Each week we introduce a topic. I wouldn't necessarily say it's just a challenge, but you can see, population, food, energy security, climate change, notions of planetary boundaries. There's the plenary lecture on the Thursday where I talk to you, and then on the seminar, the immediate day, then we do the seminar activities. Now, one model of a seminar, and tell me if I'm anywhere near your experience, is that you have the lecture, and then they give you the reading, and then a few days later you turn up, and then you do that thing in the seminar where they say, so who read the paper? And nobody wants to own up, because no one's going to own up, because then they can ask questions. And maybe nobody did read the paper. And then there's that kind of standoff between I keep asking questions more and more passively, aggressively, and then you have less and less engagement, and then basically I just give another lecture to explain the paper that I asked you to read. So we don't do that. We do much more structured seminars. Also, I've got to be realistic, because if I give you a lecture on a Thursday and then there's a seminar on the Friday, you're not going to spend all the evening or the afternoon doing the required reading, because you've got all these other things to do. So we've got to be realistic about what you can actually do between the lectures and seminars. But these are the overall topics, and here we are in week 1. So how it's taught. So we've got the lecture, we've got the seminars. There's also these regular video lectures. I'll talk a little bit more about them later. I appreciate that engagement with online material is strongly dependent on the duration of that material. Basically, if you put a video up that's longer than 5 minutes, nobody watches it. Or even if it is longer than 5 minutes, you look at the engagement statistics and nobody looks at it for more than 5 minutes. Some of the video lectures are more than 5 minutes. I just want to give you a warning about that. But I think they're good, and it's important to stress they are actually part of the contact hours. We do 1 hour in class, we do 1 hour in the seminar, and there are 30 or 45-minute video lectures that I will ask you to view at points over the 12 weeks. In more detail, this is what it looks like. So the greens are the lectures. So here we are today. We would typically have a seminar slot, but this is my kind of introductory and overview lecture. Then on the Thursday we do the elements, and Friday the seminars. Now, these blocks here are the assessments. The assessments, one of which we will actually undertake, and that should actually say assessment 2, because we only have 2 assessments. Those assessments we will actually conduct in class, okay? And I'll get to those shortly. Now, the seminar work is done in groups, and ideally you will go through the entire module in a group. That has proved to be incredibly effective. One way it's effective is because if you can't make a class, you've got someone in your group who can either give you the notes or tell you what it's about. Also, you can meet up outside of class because there is a group assessment, but more generally when you meet with people and talk to them, then you get much more out of the talk material. Okay? So the group assessments, the group work is really important. At this point, someone always panics. They think, I can't make the seminar, I'm not going to get in a group, I want to be in this seminar slot or something. It's all right. You can get into a group, and at some point in the not too distant future, hopefully you can swap, so we can sort that out. If you have any problems getting into a group, I can help you. If you want to swap seminars, then all that is possible too. Okay? So if you're stressed about getting into a group, finding a seminar slot, then don't worry. Next thing. So a few questions about the style of my teaching. You've most probably already inferred this from yesterday. I'm not a massive fan of classical PowerPoint, so every time I put words up on the slide, I feel a little bit of me dies, because ideally I just want to talk to you, I'd like you to listen to me, and it's been shown, the more information, the more material I give on the slide, then the more you're going to look at that, and you're just not going to listen to what I'm saying. So then why should I be here? I might as well just give you a handout or something. So what this means is that I try and produce slides which are maybe a bit more generic, or they're certainly not specifically guidances for your teaching. I also have a thing about memes. I'm a sad and lonely man, and I try and talk to young people using these cutting-edge communication tools and techniques. They can be effective, and I'm setting myself the challenge. I want to give an entire lecture in nothing but memes, because I think they can be very effective. So here's another one. What all this means is that you might be used to printing off the slides of a lecture, taking them to class, and then writing on them and annotating them and using them as, no worries, I'm going to get to that in a moment. And using it as the basis for an important component of your learning. It's not going to work because lots of my slides don't mean anything in the absence of me telling you what it means. For example, here's a random slide. It's a grain of rice. Week 3, I think. Here's another one. It's the north face of Everest. It's a beautiful view. But in and of its own, if you were just to print that off, you're not going to get any context. I don't put any notes on there. There aren't any handouts as such. Now, this is where it gets interesting for some of us. I like the lecture as the kind of the performance element where I can try and explain what it is I'm talking about. I think this goes back to my undergraduate in philosophy. Because in those days, I mean, I'm not so old we're, in ancient Greece sitting around togas and stuff. But largely, a philosophy lecture was some person just telling us something or talking about something. It might be even a bit of a dialogue, a Socratic dialogue perhaps. What this means is that concentration is really important, and what I would like in lectures, and to a certain extent we can discuss this in seminars, is that they are what we call device-free. So there's no laptops, no mobile phones, no iPads. Why do I suggest that? Now, in suggesting that, I realise that some people have legitimate reasons why they have to have a laptop in class. It might be an enabling reason. It might also be that their handwriting, like mine, is very, very bad, or they're just impossible to make notes. If you would like to use a laptop or a device, then please come and see me, it's fine. And once we agree that, I'm not going to, pick on anyone or point to anyone or try and, make anyone feel uncomfortable about that choice. And also, I ask this not because I don't think you can manage your own devices. If you want to, study in a certain way, you're all adults. That's not for me to say. The reason I suggest we go device-free is because it has been shown, and there's a reasonable amount of evidence, I'm not going to say it's compelling, that these devices can be distracting to other people. So if you want to distract yourself, that's absolutely fine. And I'm not going to tell you how you should conduct your learning. But certainly having a screen that maybe some moving images or scrolling, I don't know about you, I just find it impossible not to see what people are looking on Facebook. That it can actually be a bit distracting. So if you don't have those screens, if you don't have those distractions, then typically the learning environment becomes more effective. Right? So that's why I'd like us to try. If you have particular requirements, you can come see me now, or you can drop me an email, we can talk about it. So that might preempt the what the question when I suggest we may want to try and go device-free. If I'm going to do that, then I need to make sure that I do as much as I can to support the lectures. Right? So I do that by putting the lecture slides up, even though in and of themselves they don't mean anything, really. But also I record the lectures and I put them on Panopto. So if you go to, for example, course content on Blackboard, then there'll be this year's material. You can look at last year's material, be advised that it will most probably change quite substantively, but if you want to have a look ahead, you're more than welcome. The assessments are different, for example, in some of the lectures. Then you go in week 1, you'll see the slides here in PDF format, and then you'll also see a direct link to the Panopto video session. You can look in recorded sessions where you see them all, and then you'll see all of last year's sessions as well. But if you just want to know what you have to know in order to progress through the course on a week-by-week basis, just look in the relevant folder and you will see the information that you need. Okay? So, other thing. Who's heard of just-in-time teaching? Anyone? No one's ever heard of this. Okay, so just-in-time teaching is meant to be a flexible approach to teaching whereby the material that I present and the way that I present it, the way we do the teaching, changes in response to how I think that teaching is effective. Now, it's been shown in many, many different disciplines. This is a really effective way of teaching, but in this module I think it's really important because you all come from different programs of study, you're at different years of those programs of study, so I can't assume prerequisite knowledge and I can't assume what's going to work well and maybe what's going to fall on its arse. So we do that by feedback. So I get regular feedback from you. So the things such as quizzes, test and questions, they're the formative. You heard of formative assessments? Yeah, the shit you don't worry about because you don't get a mark for. Well, that's really important for me because these very short quizzes, we're only talking a couple of minutes, allow me to get a good understanding of your level of knowledge and whether or not things I'm saying are making sense. Based on that, I can adjust the content of lectures, and sometimes I might even do that immediately before the lecture. So I always check the material I present, but sometimes if you see me typing on my laptop before I give a lecture, I might actually be adjusting some of the slides of material. So that means that things can and do change quite at the last minute. So I can't guarantee that the slides I put up on Blackboard will actually be the slides that I will present in class. Sometimes there are tweaks, sometimes I end up doing something completely different. Blackboard always gets up to date, but they may be changes. The other thing we do, flipped teaching. Who's heard of that one? Great. Right, so flipped teaching is when we turn the classroom upside down, as demonstrated by that zany animation that took me all afternoon to fathom out. So, flipped teaching. The usual context of learning is I stand here, you try not to fall asleep, then I set you some homework. At your own time, you read some papers, and then maybe you do some written work, and then we come back into class and we carry on. Flipped teaching is where you do some kind of passive learning outside the classroom, and then when we come into the classroom, we actually do the homework. So you can imagine you do the lecture outside, and we do the homework in the class. Why do we want to do that? It can be very effective sometimes. You don't do it all the time, but rather than me stand here, for example, and try and teach you some of the basics of climate change, I can instead get Professor John Shepherd, Fellow of the Royal Society, Deputy Director of the Tyndall Centre, author of the Royal Society report on geoengineering, to do that for us. So I recorded a lecture with John, and you can watch this in your own time, and then there will be some activities that we will conduct in class in your groups. So the idea, you get some of the core information, and I've got video lectures on some elements of population and governance and biodiversity, and then in the class we can then work on what that actually means in the context of the global challenges. Okay? This works in the context of, so there'll be some after class materials, and then in these seminars we do these things called flip sheets. So everybody gets a flip sheet, it's a simple piece of A4, there'll be some questions on there that might test your basic knowledge, but usually the interesting stuff are the group activities. I'll ask you to answer some questions in a group. And some of these aren't science questions at all, they're value judgments. They might be moral or ethical issues. You work on them in pairs, but typically in your groups. I come round and I talk to you, I see how the group's progressing. You can ask me questions. I may have some teaching assistants in some seminars, so if you get stuck, you can immediately get some help. And then we often report back to the entire class, and then we can see how other people have been doing on. So it's a collaborative, interactive kind of teaching, rather than I expect you to fathom this all out in your own time. There's a lot of that as well, but I want to do as much as I can to help you. So, assessments. Now, when I first ran this module, we had something like 4 assessments, which was just stupid, right? So we've radically cut down the assessments over the years, well, radically in the context of there are now 2. There are now 2 assessments. It's 100% coursework, and there is no examination. Of that coursework, 70% is represented in terms of your individual work. We do an individual essay or kind of a report, and 30% is group work. Now 30% is quite high for some group activities. It needs to be a certain amount, it needs to be a certain percentage group weighting, because if it's not enough, then people just blow it off, they can't be bothered, right? So 30% is actually quite high. But in order to maintain that 30%, that means we have to work quite hard in the seminars, and I do put a lot of effort into that. So, what's the individual component? Well, I call it a report. It's got a maximum of 3,000 words, and it's due around the 30th, or on the 30th of November, which should be a Wednesday. The specific deadlines and the details will be on Blackboard, and you will go to Blackboard and you will go to the assignments section, and there'll be a direct link to e-assignments. Has anybody not submitted coursework via the electronic systems? You all know how that works? Okay, if anybody's got any questions about it, I'll go through it beforehand, but there's no hard copy hand-in, it's all done electronically. I talk about this at some point in the next 2 weeks, and I go into it in some detail. All I want to say now is that this isn't an essay. I'm not really interested in an essay. Some of you are good at writing essays. You might be doing human geography. You do a lot of essay writing. Some of you are not. You might be doing engineering or physics or something. You don't write essays. The last time you might have written an essay was when you were doing A-levels, and even then you might not have really done a proper essay until your sort of GCSEs or something. So some people get hung up on the idea of doing an essay. I don't really care about the quality of your prose. I mean, it's got to be grammatically correct. I do spell check. And I don't just want a series of bullet points, but the point of the essay is to reproduce some knowledge and demonstrate you can undertake some critical thinking, apply some systems thinking to the global challenges. You get to do a little diagram, a system dynamics diagram. And I'm very, very structured with the report. In fact, I give you questions. It's a little bit like an exam paper. I even give you a kind of suggestive marking scheme. That's just to give you an idea of where you should be putting most of your effort on. So I try and give you as much guidance and information as possible. So I don't want an introduction or a literature review or kind of polished prose and linking sentences. I can, the standard isn't massively high for the quality of the writing. I don't want to disparage people's ability to be able to write good essays, but that's not what I'm interested in. Some of you will be assessed on your ability to write essays elsewhere, and for those who aren't, it doesn't matter. Okay? Then, assessment 2 is a group talk. So, who's done a group talk in an assessed environment before? Who's done assessed group talks? Quite a few. Okay. It's a 10-minute duration. There'll be 5 people in the group, so that's about 2 minutes per person. Everybody gets to go, because I don't want anyone to miss out. And there's a group mark, and there's something called peer feedback. Who's done peer marking before? Anyone done any peer marking? Okay. So I go into this in excessive detail, and there'll be extensive instructions online on Blackboard. But peer marking is basically a system in which your final mark you get for that assessment is a function of the mark the group gets, and then that group mark will be bumped up and down by about 10%, maximum 10%, usually either way, as a consequence of what your peers in your group think you deserve. So you can think of this as a possibility to punish people who don't do enough work. And basically that's what it is, right? There's lots of interesting theory, like game theory, about punishing defectors, free riders. But some people, maybe not of their own volition, they don't intend to do this, but might not necessarily be pulling their weight in a group assessment. And so having the threat of a potential 10% reduction in their final mark is usually sufficient motivation to get them thoroughly engaged in the process. That's why we have it. It works tremendously well. Okay, so 99% of marks which we produce for assessment 2, the group assessment, everybody gets the same one, right? So when we don't see all those marks being the same, something's gone wrong. And we try to minimise that, because if you have got a problem with the way which the group is working, then you come and talk to me, and then I can help you. So usually we fix all those problems, and it's only the very rare occurrences where somebody hasn't said something or something at the last minute has happened that we see any deviation from everybody getting the same score. But it's there for that purpose, really. Now, who likes doing a presentation? Who likes standing up in front of strangers and talking? Who like? Good. Yes, yes, yes. There's a few. It can be quite fun. Many people, this is the kind of response to the idea of standing up and giving a group talk. So I've got to be really careful here, because some people are either okay with giving a talk or they actually like it. Some people, they prefer not to do it, and some people are very, very borderline kind of phobia experiences. In fact, the very suggestion that they would give a talk already might be making them feel stressed, and elevated stress levels, things like this. So it's not a level playing field. It's important to point out that you are assessed as a group, and you're not assessed in terms of how nervous you were or how professional you looked. Trust me, I can tell how much somebody is prepared. I can tell how much effort has gone into a talk. And just because you're a confident presenter doesn't mean you're going to give a good talk at all. So don't worry if you're concerned or anxious about public speaking. It's not going to impact your mark. And anyway, we do quite a lot of activities in the seminars in order to get you better. because I want you to be able to do good, interesting, engaging, maybe even entertaining talks by the end of the 12 weeks. So ideally, what I'd like us to think about is rather than produce an academic talk, which, let's be honest, can be a bit dull. Some students think the more and more information they cram into their allocated time, then the higher mark they will get. And often it's the opposite. You want to actually reduce the amount of content. You want to focus on what the story is. So then I'd rather think about this kind of model of a talk. So TED Talks, TED.com. If you don't know what a TED Talk is, then go to www.ted.com and you will see, basically it's just a website with loads of talks. There's over 1 billion views of the TED website now, so over 1 billion people, or at least 1 billion views of individual TED Talks. And so they are a bit subject or prone to be caricatured, lampooned perhaps. There's this kind of classic woo element of a TED Talk where it's all kind of style and absolutely no substance. I don't want you to do that. I want you to produce interesting, engaging talks. And I think a really good start would be Ken. So Ken Robinson, nearly, actually over now, over 35 million views. I think Ken is still the most popular TED Talk. And he's a really good place to start if you've never seen a TED Talk, because what Ken does, he just stands on this red carpet and he talks for 18 minutes about how schools are killing creativity and children, how by attempting to control children, in quite regimented teaching environments, we are kind of wringing out those notions of freedom and creativity, which are quite important. He doesn't use slides, he doesn't use animations or videos, there's no props, it's just someone talking engagingly, coming with examples, analogies, and he's also really quite funny. So that's the kind of talk that I'd like you to be able to give as a group. Tell a story. Engage a general audience about a particular element of the global challenges, some elements of the module, and be able to do that effectively. And I do think that's a very effective skill, it's a very marketable skill that you're going to have, and it's one of the important outcomes of the module after 12 weeks. So we do work on it a lot. Okay. Feedback. So I've talked about feedback is important. It's important for me in order to be able to improve the module. And I'll be honest with you, because feedback is scary. Often when we ask for feedback, really just fishing for compliments. Oh, you're so good. Oh, that was so lovely. Oh, I think that's brilliant. It's quite hard to open up yourself to, well, actually, no, that wasn't very good, or, you know, you suck. But feedback is important. And we do it a lot. And it comes through lots of different channels. So the most important one, I think, is actually talk to you in the seminars. So you might be doing group work or work in pairs, but I'm always here and I'm always talking to you in order to see how things are going. And that's the opportunity for you to tell me what you're doing, are things making sense. Blackboard comments are great. So there is a discussion board. I also ask you sometimes to write paper-based feedback. So if there's a couple of minutes free at the end of a lecture, I might ask you to answer 2 or 3 questions. For example, what do you like in this module? What's going well? What don't you like? What do you want to see more of, or what do you want to see less of? And also, I mark assessments. For you, that's maybe not very important, because by the time I mark the assessments and think about what it means, you're out the door and you're doing something else. But it's really important for me to be able to understand what has worked, what hasn't, and then I can continue to improve the module. About the Blackboard discussion forum, so there is a discussion board if you go to Blackboard. So this is the student view, so hopefully this is what you see when you log into Blackboard. Click on the discussion board and then you'll see a forum. At the moment there's just one. It's a general place to ask questions. So there's 2 reasons why this proves to be incredibly effective. The first one is you've got a question about the logistics of something, maybe a date of an assessment or some detail of how the module might be run. You go into the discussion board and somebody's already asked that question and have already replied, so you get the answer instantly. So that's a useful place for the more kind of mundane logistics thing. Also, it's a place where you can pose more general questions about content or the subject. So if you find an interesting UN report about population growth, which seems to contradict something else that I've asked you to read, then you can put a post up and then we can talk about it. I monitor this all the time, and I've got 2 teaching assistants that do. And when it works well, then we actually start a conversation, and that can really actually enrich some of the learning. The point of all this, the point of the feedback, is that we actually get better. So if I can work out what's working and what's not working and then change it accordingly, then that means you're going to get more from the module. And then also, I have an awful lot to learn of how to improve my teaching, how I can better present the information, how I can better do my teaching. So, I'm going to wrap up, okay? And I'm going to wrap up with a kind of a call to action, which is on a Friday and everyone's falling asleep or just want to go to the bar and it's been the first week of teaching. But try and muster some enthusiasm because this classic poster, you've most probably seen it before. I need to stress that I think we can do this. So the module is quite complicated, potentially bewildering. I'm going to throw systems dynamics at you, which on the surface seems simple, but almost everybody at some point will struggle with understanding a feedback loop, or positive feedback or negative feedback. They're not, once you understand them, these things make perfect sense, but it can be a bit difficult. And more generally, the things that we're talking about, those global challenges, they seem insurmountable. They seem almost impossible. So, the international agreement, Paris, COP21, November, right? So you may know that the international community has just ratified the Paris Agreement, okay? So 2 degrees warming, the global community undertakes to do no more than that. Hooray, we're saved. Well, maybe not, no. Because it also understood that 2 degrees isn't where we should be, it's actually 1.5 degrees. Beyond 1.5 degrees, some low-lying nations won't exist anymore. We won't have coral reefs, there'll be widespread habitat destruction. So let's stabilise at 1.5 degrees. And they had the aspiration and to do the necessary steps. So hooray, we're saved. Not necessarily. Because at current rates of emission, we're going to blow our 1.5 degrees warming budget in about 5 years. So in 5 years, the global emissions of greenhouse gases have to be 0. That's not going to happen. You won't find anyone who thinks that's going to happen. And we talk about it in the context of climate change, but what we're actually really doing when we're signing up to 1.5 and 2 degrees is we are signing up future generations to undertake negative emissions technology. They're going to have to work out somehow to suck out significant amounts of CO2 from the Earth's atmosphere and potentially have to do that for centuries. And if they don't, then they can see very dramatic runaway climate change. So this can be a bit depressing if you're not careful about it. And I'll be honest, there's been times when I've been a bit down on the prospects of not humanity. So as I said yesterday, humans aren't going to go extinct, but in terms of the welfare, the well-being of people at some point into the future. But it's important to stress that we can do this. So there's nothing technologically, scientifically impossible about the solutions that already exist. There are answers. That doesn't mean they're easy. If they're easy, we would have done them now. So it's important that I continually stress to you that yes, it's not easy, but it's actually possible if we can do it. In the context of this module, yes, you can do it if you show up and work, right? Now, I appreciate you're all busy. Some of you are holding down jobs. Some of my tutees almost work full time. And I'm not here to tell you not to do that because you need the money. We're throwing reading at you. You've got other commitments. Some poor souls have got long distance relationships or something. You have a finite amount of time. And I can't stand here and insist you come to every single one of my contact hours. And if you don't turn up, I will take it as a personal affront. So this is the deal, right? The lectures I record, things like this I record. You don't have to be here, although I know you like to be in my company, right? So if you can't make it, it's no disaster. You can get the slides, you can get the recording, and hopefully, if you get into groups quickly, you can meet with your group members and you can talk about it, right? That's the peer learning. It's really, really important. The thing I really don't want you to miss are the seminars, because the seminars where we do the substantive learning. There's been something of a kind of bimodal distribution of marks, basically 2 humps of marks in the module. One hump of mark are the people who pretty much turn up to all the seminars and are very engaged, and they will get a first-class mark or even better. Then there's a kind of the middling people who kind of, muddle on through. And then there's another kind of, it's much smaller, but it's a distinct distribution of people who don't do as well as perhaps they thought they could have done because they apply their typical model of learning, which is go through the material, figure out what I'm going to concentrate on, and then just bin the rest, because then I can prioritise my work on my dissertation or this really hard calculus module that I'm trying to fathom out. This module works really well if you just keep at it and keep nibbling away and just be able to turn up. I'll do what I can to facilitate the learning, but I can't do that if you're not actually in the class. So please do turn up to the seminars. It's where you will get the most benefit from the teaching. Last slide. So, yesterday I said, why does the module exist? Kind of, why do I do that? Today I've talked a little bit about my background, the value of interdisciplinary research, how I came to research and teach the things I do. I just want to finish on why I think the university should run a module like this, because I do couch it, I do understand it in the context of intergenerational responsibility. So if you take Bennington's Perfect Storm seriously, 2040, that's not really very long. That's certainly within your working lives. And so it's kind of your responsibility to fix it, but you're not responsible for these set of global challenges. You're not the generation that overconsumes and overproduced and produced too much pollution, for example. But you, like it or not, are going to be the generation that are going to have to fathom this out. So I think the institution has got a responsibility to do what it can to at least tell you about these issues that will be affecting you at some point in the near future, and then hopefully give you some skills, opportunities and experience to be able to do something about it. After class, the only thing I would like to do, if you haven't already, give this a read. It'll only take you 5 minutes. We start to ramp things up a little bit more next week, but other than that, thank you very much and hello again. Get back.